To really work that closely with law enforcement is a big deal, and we're very proud about that. So thank you. And with that, I'm going to invite Megan up to share the plan.
Welcome.
Thank you, Chair, Mayor, members of the City Council, members of the Board of Supervisors. This is really exciting just to see everyone here. Everyone who's spoken so far has talked about the collaboration in place, and it is impressive and visually arresting to me to see that everybody actually is committed to this issue, wants to hear what the plan is, and is willing to come together over that. Rob actually asked me recently if I had heard of this happening before, and I thought about it for a while and came to the conclusion that I have not. Anywhere in the country, I personally have not seen anything like this before. So it's really exciting, and we're really grateful to be a part of it. So I too have to start off by just saying also city-county partnerships are often essential and difficult. The city government and county government do different things, and they have different sets of resources, and they are tasked with achieving different kinds of results. So to see the city and the county come together and to have the opportunity to see this partnership that we've all been talking about come together and see some concrete results is pretty exciting, and I think most importantly really promising for you in terms of your next steps as a community in reducing homelessness. What do I do with that one? This one. I know how to work it. So with Focus Strategies, we're a consulting firm and a technical assistance provider. We're based in Sacramento. We do work all over the country, and we exclusively help communities to reduce homelessness. Our primary strategy is to help communities see what resources, system components, and what kinds of local infrastructure you have to work on homelessness, and then use that data and information to inform what steps you can best take next to reduce homelessness the most. Okay. So many of you have heard me speak before, and I want to take this opportunity to start with the end in mind. So to get to a place where the city of Eureka and Humboldt County have dramatically reduced homelessness, what that actually takes is stopping people from entering homelessness. This is diverting people from becoming homeless in the first place. So rehousing or quickly preserving housing for people who are just knocking on the homeless system or about to be on the streets or just entering the street. This is about prioritizing people with the highest needs for housing. So I'm going to talk a lot about this today, and I think this is a key challenge in your particular community because you do have a lot of homeless people with significant needs, which I know is no surprise to anyone here. Also, homeless people must be engaged quickly in the least expensive resource to solve their homelessness so that you can quickly and efficiently organize all of your resources so that people get just what they need to end their homelessness so that the resources are sufficient to house everybody who is homeless. That, of course, means that people have short lengths of stay in programs that I believe last time I was here in May and June, both the City Council and the Board of Supervisors separately at that point. I talked a bit about this length of stay piece, which is easy to move past, but I'm going to spend a little more time on this today. This is about reorienting homeless programs and our expectations of homeless programs and the resources that fund those programs so that people are staying in homeless programs a short amount of time and exiting to permanent housing. The longer we keep people in programs, the longer that they are still homeless, and those dollars are still going to the same people while other people are still outside. Of course, that also means people have to be leaving to permanent housing. We can't just be exiting people back to the streets. I talked a bit about cost effectiveness. That always warrants another bullet. We've got to stretch those resources as far as possible. And then, of course, you have to be collecting, reporting, and analyzing your data so that you know actually what is happening with the people that you're serving and housing, and whether or not they're returning to homelessness. So one thing you'll note about the report is that it talks about this as a key strategy, and it's hard to really understand the result of that until you're making the changes that the report recommends making. Okay. So as Rob touched on, we completed a policy paper for the City of Eureka that was actually originally conducted as part of the general plan update, which is a pretty innovative strategy and thing to do. And what it did was look at the homeless population in Eureka at that point in time, and it assessed the existing programs and strategies that were in place locally and particularly in Eureka, and then made recommendations to achieve reductions in homelessness. The focus of that report was about getting things going quickly, and Barbara talked about some of the actions that were taken which have had a good impact but are not to scale. Okay. So Rob also talked about moving to phase 1, this implementation plan. So the report that I'll be presenting the body of at this point builds on that policy paper and those strategies, so they're in alignment, and it's building out many of the same recommendations that were made at that time, but again, taking them to scale and fleshing them out in more detail. This is, of course, as we've all been talking about, a collaborative project between the city and the county, and hopefully, ultimately, the private funding community and the community at large, so that you have real support for making important changes. We also collected a bunch of additional information to update what we knew about homelessness in Eureka that was published originally in 2014. So we collected new information and completed the report, and then you now have the final, and it's 2016 already. So I'm just going to briefly talk about what's in the plan. It is, I think, close to a 50-page plan. I'm sure everyone has it memorized. This plan basically has what we did, all those pieces of information that we collected, and who we talked to, and how this all came about, what methods we used. It sets the federal policy context, so a lot of the resources that you have here in the community already dedicated to homelessness or that are restricted to serve homeless people are all governed by federal policy. We also happen to be in a wonderful situation where federal policy is wise and forward-thinking, and it's very much about measuring the results of the work that you're doing. So it sets that. The green is what I'm going to focus on today, which is really updates to the 2014 policy paper. Barbara talked a lot about accomplishments. I'll touch on that. And then the specific recommendations. There's basically 4 key sets of strategies and specific steps within those that we recommend taking, and an implementation plan, which I'll talk about a bit as well, so you can get a sense of the specific detail that we've provided in terms of what your next steps would be should you endorse and adopt this plan. And then also included in the report is a funding source inventory. This is an inventory of the sources you have that are eligible to serve homeless people in the community, and talks about and shows what and how those resources could be used. It's probably important to mention, it's not like that money is just sitting there waiting for you to decide to spend it on homelessness, right? But those are funds that either must be or could be used on homelessness if you were to prioritize that use. And then finally, there's a housing market analysis that looks at, do you even have the inventory available to move homeless people into? Okay, so just quickly, a couple of updates since the policy paper, the key deliverable from 2014. The 2015 point-in-time count, that's the homeless point-in-time count, showed 844 unsheltered homeless people in Humboldt County, of whom more than half were in the city of Eureka. I know that second bullet is a big surprise to everyone, that there's a lot of community impact from homelessness here. We do this work all over the country, and I have to say, I believe, though I don't know that I've done the math everywhere, I know that this is the only small or mid-sized community we work with whose per capita rate of homelessness is over 2%. It's generally less than 0.5%. So it is quite an order of magnitude larger here per capita than most any other place that I'm aware of. So I have a few bullets here about accomplishments, but I actually think Barbara covered accomplishments in better detail and had some of the same pieces here. We actually saw each other's slides in advance, but I thought, well, you got to always highlight accomplishments, right? So I left this here, and I thought this would just be a good place to say again, as I move into the specific strategies and recommendations, you have a lot to build on here. You have a leadership infrastructure in place, and I will say that is a condition of success. You have some programs that have been built and reoriented to adopt the strategies that are in this plan. So you're not starting from scratch. You're not starting from a year or two ago where a lot of these ideas were an uphill battle. A lot of that pushing the boulder uphill, you're at least halfway up the hill, right? You've made it a good distance, and I think that's important. It's not like these are isolated things that happened and we can all clap and that they're over, right? These are key improvements that have been made and are still in place. Okay. So these are the 4 key strategies that we recommend. Housing first, strengthen the MIST, and increase focus on housing solutions with that team. I'm going to talk more about each of these. Create direct and low barrier pathways to housing. And use data systems to track your progress so you can make continual shifts and adjust to meet the needs. Okay. So housing first. Housing first is an approach and a philosophy, and it is a sea change in our field. I think it's really important to know and really understand that reality because this is systems change and it's really hard work. It used to be that people had to be ready for housing, so we would bring homeless people into programs and would provide a lot of services, employment services and all kinds of services, life skills training and lots of things. And our goal was to get people to a place where they were ready to be self-sufficient. The overwhelming evidence is that that doesn't work, that actually the things that help stabilize people in housing the fastest are in fact giving them a safe, permanent place to be, house them, and then it turns out that works much better than any of our previous approaches. So truly embracing that means embracing housing first for all subpopulations of your homeless population. Whether people have disabilities, multiple disabilities, people are newly homeless, whatever the situation might be, the intervention type, and I'll get into this detail in a little bit, the intervention type, like what program they receive, might be different. But that overwhelming overall focus is how do we get people into housing? And how do we get people back integrated into the community and not staying outside or cycling through programs that we're offering, but actually just house people, and then we can provide services to them to meet their particular household's needs over time. So a couple of our specific recommendations that are in the implementation plan include the city and the county adopting a policy statement that endorses a housing first approach as the framework for reducing homelessness in the community. If you don't have a housing first approach, and I would also suggest if the leadership doesn't embrace that, what you have is everybody is rowing in different directions. people in the community who are providing services, who are providing meals, who are providing whatever supports to homeless people are messaging something different. So just try this for a while, we'll help you here for a while. We can keep our program going the way it is because we know our population and our population needs this, right? What you have to do is get everybody in the same boat, rowing in the same direction so that you can actually make progress and everybody is lined up to bring people in and empower people to trust that they will make it and then provide services once people are housed. So that's a key recommendation. The next is to convene a Housing First Summit and provide training and coaching for providers and other stakeholders. So this is underneath the policy, we're going to be a Housing First community. I should also add that every community that's had significant measurable drops in homelessness has adopted a Housing First approach. That's an important thing to mention. And so adopting that at a policy level and then convening the stakeholders and the people who are actually charged with changing their programs, building new programs, operating differently, to bring them together in a summit to be clear, this is the new approach that we're taking, and then give people the tools they need to be able to carry out that approach. So that's some retooling, that's some training to get everybody, again, rowing in the same direction. Okay, so just to be clear, the MIST is great. The reason we want to strengthen the, I think a better title would actually be expand or take to scale the MIST. So I believe everyone's familiar with MIST, but it's what Barbara was talking about, which is actually a team that is conducting outreach and making referrals to housing, mental health services, and other supports with people out on the streets all the time. And they are doing a great job. They've gotten people housed, and they've certainly gotten people access to services. That team currently has embraced all of the Housing First principles that we've talked about. What they don't have is, from our perspective, is that they're not operating at scale. So they have a mental health clinician, they're making some housing referrals, they're helping people navigate and get into permanent housing, but they don't have an alcohol and drug specialist, and they don't have access to more housing resources. And there isn't really a pathway for that or funding for that. So really looking at aligning resources there and taking the MIST to scale. You could go from a lot of contacts but a small number of people who are actually successfully housed to moving a much greater number of those contacts into permanent housing and off the streets. Okay, so this next one is homeless systems change in a slide. This is creating a direct and low barrier pathways to housing. So you have some county and city leadership within the staff leadership who understand Housing First and have made real strides, and they're the ones who have really created all the successes that we've been talking about. That's not the same thing as the whole system being oriented to offering housing, because, and this is not sort of bad on Humboldt County or the city of Eureka. In fact, this is how homeless systems have operated for the, since the 80s when they really were created. They were organically created and everybody was just serving the next person in front of them. And we didn't really have systems and pathways out to permanent housing. So it's time to move in that direction, and the things that you would need to accomplish that include diversion, which I mentioned at the beginning, and this really is about having system-wide diversion where instead of people just falling into homelessness and then becoming perhaps more impacted by their disabilities or developing disabilities related to mental health and substance abuse in particular, and then sort of having that become worse and worse, what you do is you keep people from becoming chronically homeless or even longer-term homeless by housing them really quickly. That takes a concerted effort, and it does take some resources. Per person, it's actually very inexpensive. So it's a worthwhile investment and cheaper, generally speaking, than any alternative, including emergency shelter. Interim housing. So recently, the MAC transitioned and became an interim housing or a short-term stay transitional housing where people could be there for a short amount of time, and then again, that focus on short length of stay and moving people out to permanent housing. You may, in fact, need more interim housing. I think it is worth putting some of the pieces together in terms of the first steps of the implementation plan, and then deciding what those next steps are in terms of interim housing.